Hello everyone, and welcome to the Week 4 FAQ. I'm Nadir Akhtar, and I'll be taking you through this week's questions. Question number 1. What happens to my coins when there's a hard fork? And is my investment lost? Well, this is a very good question because yes and no. It's a very interesting question because there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens when there's a hard fork. If you take the DAO hack, for example, you'll notice that Ethereum and Ethereum Classic had this common base, but when the majority of miners decided to roll back the DAO hack, that chain then forked off from the original chain. And the original chain, that subset of miners, is known as Ethereum Classic. So if you had coins at this time before the fork happened, and then fork happens, you now have coins on two different forks. So in a sense, the amount of tokens you have has doubled, because now you have tokens on this fork, and you have tokens on this fork. So in that sense, no, your investment is not lost. In fact, it's actually doubled. But that doesn't mean the value of your total tokens is the same. Here's why. Ethereum was worth about $15 before the DAO hack. And after, one fork was worth $3, Ethereum Classic, and the other fork was worth $12, Ethereum. So the total value of your tokens is still the same at $15 for a pair of Ethereum and Ethereum Classic tokens. But the total number of tokens you have and the places where you can use those tokens is now doubled. So in that sense, your tokens, your coins, are still accessible on two different forks because you have the same address on both those forks, which is controlled by a private key. And your investment, the value of your investment will change depending on the perspective of everyone who's investing in one chain or the other. For example, when Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash forked off, in that scenario, the total value of tokens actually increased overall. Though Bitcoin lost a little bit of value, it didn't lose that much compared to the amount that Bitcoin Cash gained. Meaning that the total amount of your investment would have actually been higher. A lot of people bought into Bitcoin right before the fork so that they would have coins on both chains. Because if I have private key ABC at address 123, when the fork happens, both networks recognize address 123 as having private key ABC because they're built off of the same common history. So for that reason, your tokens, they're not lost, they're actually doubled, but your investment, the value of your investment, may change depending on circumstance, whether for better or for worse. Question number 2. Why would anyone use a centralized exchange when cryptocurrency is all about decentralization? Well, keep in mind that not everyone who uses cryptocurrency is focused on decentralization. You might wonder, well, then why even bother using cryptocurrency at all? Well, 1, some people like to trade it. 2, some people just like to say that they hold it. And 3, some people, they don't understand cryptocurrency. They don't know that it's meant to be decentralized. So for that reason, a centralized exchange is very useful. It's very accessible for people who don't know anything about cryptocurrency. Coinbase is often the entryway for most people who are getting into owning some Bitcoin because of the fact that they just have to make an account, throw in their password, and then they are told that they own some amount of Bitcoin after they send over money. Keep in mind that this interface looks just like every other interface. Every other, whether it be Steam for buying games, whether you're redeeming some virtual game points, you just put in your account information, throw your bank account information in there as well, and then you get some points. So it looks all the same to users, and those who don't care about decentralization, they don't see a difference. But for those who understand that cryptocurrency is about decentralization, that's why they realize that decentralized exchanges are valuable, because that way you can still exchange tokens of all kinds while still holding onto your private key. So if you're not concerned about decentralization and holding onto your own private key, you'll prefer a centralized exchange. But if you are concerned about that, you'll prefer a decentralized one. So it's not so much about one being better than the other, it's simply a matter of preference and whether you choose to adhere to the original purpose of cryptocurrencies. Maybe decentralization for you is what cryptocurrencies were always about. Maybe for you, those were just a part of it, but not necessarily the biggest gain value. No, to each their own, but the centralized exchange aspect allows people to get introduced, while decentralized exchanges allow those who are focused on keeping the decentralization aspect, they give them that service and provide it for those who don't have it already. Question number 3. What's the legal status of Bitcoin, and without government support, can it ever become mainstream? Well, first, the legal status of Bitcoin. Now, it's an interesting one because it differs from country to country, as you can probably imagine. In For example, the UK, Bitcoin is encouraged. They don't want to discourage people from using Bitcoin because they want to allow people to use Bitcoin. On top of that, in Japan, Bitcoin is recognized as a legal method of payment because of the fact that a lot of people want to use it. Though it is not considered a legal currency, it is still recognized as a way to purchase goods and services. On the other hand, countries like Russia and India had one time banned Bitcoin because they saw it as a threat to their own local currency or their own national currency. So for that reason, the perspective of Bitcoin differs depending on the aims of the government. In the US, it happens that Bitcoin is recognized as an asset and taxed as such, but it is not necessarily a currency, though it is not banned as well. It is not something that people cannot own. So the US even differs from state to state as to what the legal status is about Bitcoin and blockchain in general. Now, as for whether government support is necessary for Bitcoin to become mainstream, notice that Bitcoin was born such that it could avoid the need for government support. It was born to exist without the need for any central entity or authority to approve of it for it to exist. So on one perspective, yes, Bitcoin can become mainstream without government support, and in the other one, sure, it would be helpful, and it might deter people from using Bitcoin, but it doesn't stop people from using Bitcoin. There's always ways to access Bitcoins no matter how much the government or other authorities might try to stop people. If Bitcoin's truly meant to serve that purpose of being beyond governments and truly global, it won't matter whether the government fully supports it or fully rejects it. If it does what it's meant to do, then anyone around the world can access it without censorship. So, on one hand, yes, government support would be helpful, but if Bitcoin does what it's truly meant to do, government support won't be necessary for it to become mainstream as in accessible to all people around the world.